most modern, let's say, relatively modern conceptions of religion have a concept of God, and he's a man. But here we have, of course, in India we do have the opposite, where we have Kali and Durga. They celebrated as the highest entity, more than any male. So we got female also. And in ancient times we see also that they were often worshipping the female figure more than the male figure. But then eventually the male figure dominated, and we have a male form of God. But in Radha Krishna we have a combined form. One is not superior to the other. Of course we say Krishna is ontologically superior, but in another way Radha is higher because she controls Krishna. So therefore Radha is put in a higher position often, and therefore we say we approach Krishna through Radha. So Radha gets great glorification. So we may ask, of course, where is Radha mentioned, because in Srimad Bhagavatam we don't even see Radha's name directly there. And of course indirectly we can infer in the Rasa Leela, where Sukadev Goswami describes how Krishna took one gopi who was worshipped more than the others. So Aradhya means worshipped. And of course Aradhya and Radha kind of indicate the same thing. So Radha is the one who's most worshipped. So our acharyas point out that that actually means Radha, but her name is not mentioned directly. And actually, if we look in the whole Bhagavatam, we'll see that none of the gopis' names are mentioned directly. But we see in the commentaries of our acharyas, in discussing the Rasa Leela particularly, that they've actually identified, oh, this one is Lalita, this one is Vishaka, this one is Chandravali, etc. So they start identifying the different gopis by their activities, their character and their activities, even though they're not mentioned directly. So in that way we see that Sukadeva Goswami didn't mention anybody, but those who are knowledgeable of rasa and the different types of personalities of gopis, they can recognize these different persons taking part in the pastimes. So anyway, Radha's not directly mentioned in the Bhagavatam, but we do have her mentioned obviously in Puranas like Brahmavarta Purana and Padma Purana and other Puranas. So it's not that her name isn't mentioned in other Puranas. The other objection would be that, well, she's not mentioned in the Vedas. We can also say that Krishna's not mentioned in the Vedas also, but then our acharyas do make quotations from Chandogya Upanishad and other Upanishads to show that Krishna is mentioned. And along with that, then we do have some quotations that also mention Radha, like the Rik Parishishta and the Gopal Tapani Upanishad. So even in the Vedas we do have some mention of Radha. But in other works, of course, we have more definite descriptions of Radha. So this is one description here from Gautamiya Tantra. I think this is what Bhanu Swami quoted in the morning, and where Radhika is Paradevata, and she's Devi and she's Krishnamai, so she is the person who is completely devoted to Krishna. She is the highest object of worship, Paradevata. She is the all Lakshmis incarnate, so all of the consorts of the Lord in any form ultimately derive from Radha. Sarva Kanti means she is most beautiful. And if anyone is beautiful, she is most beautiful of all. And Sammohini, she enchants everybody. She is the most beautiful of all personalities. So that's the glorification of Radha from the Gautamiya Tantra. And of course in Matsya Purana then we find this statement, in Varanasi Vishalakshi presides as a form of Durga Devi, in Puri Vimala presides, in Dwarka Rukmini presides, and in Vrindavan Radha presides. So she's, everyone actually expands from her. And it is explained in Gautamiya Tantra that Radha is the essence of that great Shakti called Hladini, the best of all Shaktis. So this is expanded in the Chaitanya Charitamrita of Krishna's Kaviraj, where he talks about Radha being directly the Hladini Shakti. Of course he mentions all three Shaktis, Hladini, Samvit, and Sandhini Shaktis as the principal aspects of the internal energy of Krishna. So Krishna, of course, exists, but he has to do things. He has to perform activities. So he does this through his Shaktis. So how does he manifest his form? How does he manifest his Dham? How does he manifest anything? It's through Sandhini Shakti, which is represented by Balaram and Anantashesha. So they are the ones in charge of manifesting Krishna's form, qualities, and activities, and the whole spiritual world. And how is anything become aware? How does anyone get consciousness of anything? How does anyone experience anything? How is knowledge exchanged in the spiritual world? It is through the Samvit Shakti. So this allows the jivas to perceive the Lord spiritually. We can't perceive him with a material eye. So how can we perceive him? The internal energy of Krishna, the Samvit Shakti, operates so that we can see Krishna. So that's the Samvit Shakti. So all perception in the spiritual world is under that Shakti. And of course it's very important because the whole spiritual world is chit, full of consciousness. But of course the main aspect of Krishna is bliss. He's all-powerful, he has all knowledge, he's the cause of everything, but his ultimate quality is ananda, or bliss. So how does the Lord become blissful? Through his Hladini Shakti. So the Lord, of course, we can say is independent, so by himself he can be blissful, but bliss actually exists because of rasa, and rasa can only exist because of not one person but two persons. So if we want bliss, we need not just Krishna, we need somebody else. So the first someone, the first entity is Radha. So the relationship of Radha and Krishna gives rise to rasa, that gives rise to bliss. So Krishna experiences bliss, and Radharani experiences bliss. So she is, of course, is Hladini Shakti personified. So she's the ultimate form of bliss for Krishna. So that's why it says she's called the essence of the great Shakti called Hladini. This, of course, Hladini Shakti also manifests as bhakti. Bhakti is also part of that Hladini Shakti. And so therefore, and of course that produces rasa, and rasa produces bliss. We have quotations from scripture to show that Radha is worthy of worship. And of course, Jiva Goswami has also written one work called the Radha Krishna Archana Deepika to defend why we worship Radharani. In the Hari Bhakti Vilas, Radha is not even mentioned. It's a huge book by Gopal Bhatta Goswami and Sanatana Goswami. They never mention Radharani at all. Someone would say, oh, well, you shouldn't worship her. But then Jiva Goswami has written the Radha Krishna Archana Deepika, which he defends the existence of Radha and why we worship her. So then later on, of course, we see that all the Goswamis did write many works which describe Radharani in more detail. She of course takes birth in one sense, and as Ramai Swami mentioned this morning, there are many versions of how she takes birth, including the very complicated one, which is also mentioned in the Lalita Madhava, where with the Vindhya mountain and all this, a very complicated story, that's in there. The other one, of course, is that everyone talks about is she's born on a lotus or whatever. Our Goswamis actually don't directly mention any of that. They said her mother is, Kirtida, and father is Vrishabhanu. Her father is joyful with love. Her house is in Yavata. Her mother is Kirtida, and her father is Vrishabhanu. Her husband is Abhimanyu. Her brother-in-law is Durmukha. Her mother-in-law is Jatila, and her sister-in-law is Kutila. So there's many Leela stories written by the Goswamis about these pastimes between Krishna and Radha, and then interference by Abhimanyu and Jatila and Kutila, etc. And of course, Kirtida and Vrishabhanu are always glorified as being the mother and father. And around Radha we have Sakis, which literally means friends, but there are various degrees of friends. So we have the Sakis, the Nitya Sakis, the Prana Sakis, the Priya Sakis, and the Parama Prashta Sakis, which makes it a little more complicated. And of all of those, the Parama Prashta Sakis are the highest of all, and this is the Asta Sakis of we see of Radha and Krishna, which are represented in Mayapur and other places. So we get Lalita Vishaka Chitra Champakalata Tunga Vidya Induleka Ranga Devi and Sudevi. So just to make it very simple, why we have all these different types of Sakis. Of course, there's more varieties than that, actually. And Ujjwal Nilamani, we got like 32 varieties of different moods, and some are bold, some are timid, some are strong, some are weak, some like to argue, some like to be compliant, etc. So we get all sorts of varieties mentioned there. But just these Sakis of Radha and Krishna, they're classed like this because of how they manifest their affection. So of course they all love Radha and Krishna, but some have a little more affection for Krishna, some of these Sakis. So they're called the Sakis. Some have a little more affection for Radha, so they're called the Nitya Sakis. And if they have a little bit stronger even affection for Radha, they're called the Prana Sakis. And those who have more affection for Radha and Krishna, but it's equal, they're called the Priya Sakis. And those who have the strongest affection for Radha and Krishna together, they're called the Parama Prashta Sakis. So these are the highest ones. They have equal but very, very strong love for both Radha and Krishna. So that's why they are distinguished in this way. So we know that we have to approach Krishna through Radha, particularly for Mundriya Rasa. Of course, we also explain that you can go through Balaram because Balaram is Adi Guru, so you can approach Krishna through Balaram. Usually you probably end up with Sakya Rasa or something like that if you do that. But anyway, the Radha, mercy of Radha is very important. Without Radha's mercy, one cannot attain Krishna. Therefore, one should remember Radha and Krishna together. So if we're going to worship Radha and Krishna, we have to really get the mercy of Radha to do that. This is the truth, and again the truth. It is a truth again and again. Without the mercy of Radha, one cannot gain my mercy. That's from Narada Purana, Dr. Krishna speaking. From the mercy of Radha comes association with her Sakis. By the mercy of her Sakis, one attains the body of a gopi. So if one gets Radha's mercy, you're going to associate with the Sakis, like the Asta Sakis and other Sakis. If you get their mercy, then one can enter into those pastimes in the form of a Saki or a Manjari or whatever. So we have to worship the Sakis and Radharani properly. So Radha accepted birth in the ocean of a great cowherd named Vrishabhanu, of good family and great wealth. The milk ocean of Vrishabhanu was a mine of gems in the form of his many sons, but became perfect by producing nectar through the birth of Radha. She took birth when the moon was in Anuradha constellation, bringing joy to all 1 year after the birth of Krishna. There was some sort of controversy or people talking about how Radha was older than Krishna. I heard that in the Gulf for their coming up to, how is Radha older than Krishna? I said, no, I don't think so, because it's kind of inauspicious that the girl should be older than the boy. Even now in India, they never marry if the woman is older than the man, so probably not. But then explained in the Gopal Champa, this is explicitly that Krishna is 1 year older. Of course, 1 year plus a few days because of a few 1 week, 2 weeks extra, yeah. So, in other words, she is younger. Then I was looking on the internet, and then some people were saying she's 2 years older or 3 years older. It's strange things. But this is what Jiva Goswami says in Gopal Champu. So, Krishna's older. So even when she was born, she was most attractive and beautiful, and of course as she began to grow, was very, very beautiful. But along with her also the Sakhis were born, and they were also very, very beautiful. So we got a whole a multitude of very, very beautiful girl children born at this time. If analogies to the new moon, golden lotus, a chakora bird, or a shower of nectar do not apply to Radha, who is beyond compare, what use are they? So sometimes we compare Radha to a golden lotus, but actually the lotus is nothing in comparison to Radha. Or the chakora bird that takes the moonlight. And so Radha is looking at the face of Krishna, which is like the moon all the time. But then that's also not a good comparison. Or a shower of nectar, Radha is a shower of nectar, but these are nothing compared to actually the sweetness of Radharani. Radha grew just as Krishna grew. As the moon waxes and its beauty also increases, so Radha's beauty increased as she grew. So in the pastimes on earth, Radha has a birth and she grows, just like Krishna also grows. In the spiritual world, they're eternally Kaishora period, age, so they don't grow. But when they're on earth, they're born and they start growing. So as Radharani began to grow, she was beautiful at birth. She got more beautiful and more beautiful and more beautiful as she began to grow. She has a pink cloth over her lower limbs. There's a delicate thread in her newly pierced ears. When they first pierce the ear, they just put a little thread in there so that it doesn't close up. And then it heals. And with wandering eyes, she plays with her friends in the dust. She resembles Lakshmi with her first trace of beauty. So then they began to grow and they got more and more beautiful. When the girls grew, their beauty became famous everywhere. Their parents could not ignore this and began to worry. We do not know what wicked Kamsa will do now. So they got really afraid that Kamsa is going to steal them all or something like that. And so they wanted to get them married. But then actually they understood that actually Krishna is the only one that should marry them, but at the same time they didn't know what to do. Every day when they met, they would think internally about this. We should betroth them all. Among the boys, none is as qualified as Krishna. All others are inferior. So they wanted to all get all those girls married to Krishna, but that didn't look possible at that time. These girls defeat Lakshmi, and Krishna makes Narayan inferior. Therefore, Krishna should marry these girls since he's equal to them. What more can we say? Our houses, friends, possessions, souls, and lives are for making Krishna happy. So they were thinking like this, that they should all marry him. In this way, the young girls played in their houses, their mothers and fathers sheltering them, kept them from hearing about Krishna. But their eternal love for Krishna spontaneously awoke when they approached the brilliant Kaishore age, just as certain creepers bloom when the monsoon season arrives. So they actually hadn't even seen Krishna. But, of course, they're eternal associates. So as they grew, that love for Krishna increased, even if they hadn't seen him directly. And at the same time, the parents were worried about them. They're growing up and they have to marry somebody. So it's explained in Gopal Champu that actually then they finally did marry them off to different cowherd boys. But they were the girls were reluctant, kind of. They didn't want to do it because they were thinking, we want to marry Krishna, even if they hadn't seen him. But then Purnamasi advised, well, it doesn't really matter because what I'm going to do, I'm going to make some other forms of gopis and they're going to marry these other gopis. So it's not the real gopis at all. So they marry these other forms. So in this way, their love began to increase and increase and increase for Krishna. Just as passion arises in young girls confined to the inner chambers, so the form of Krishna appeared to the gopis without them even seeing him or hearing about him. So even though they didn't see him, internally they began to manifest. They would see Krishna internally. And this way their attraction for him began to increase more and more. When they heard the word Krishna, or holder of the flute, they saw him and became attracted to him, and not seeing him again, they suffered. They did not reveal this to anyone, but thought of meeting him. So they still hadn't met him, but if they just heard about Krishna, the word Krishna, or he holds the flute, then suddenly Krishna would appear before them. Their meditation was so strong, or the concentration on Krishna was so strong that they would see him. But they couldn't tell anybody. When the word Krishna and the sound of the flute, sweeter than nectar, enters my ears, he who appears in my mind immediately comes to me as if he knows me, though I have never seen him since birth. If I do not attain him, my life errors will soon leave my body. So they already had developed a very, very strong love for Krishna without even seeing him. And similarly, Krishna developed his love as well. With a desire to experience Radha's pervasive qualities, Krishna also developed pleasurable symptoms. My ears engaged in her name, my eyes engaged in the path to her house, my nose is engaged in her fragrance, my body is engaged in her back, and my voice is engaged in describing her qualities. Rejecting me, she quickly leaves. Because of this, Krishna, refuting his faults after consideration, remained visibly motionless like a painting. So just as the gopis, without seeing Krishna, became attracted to him, he also got attracted to the gopis. Then we have when Krishna killed Kaliya, this was an opportunity for the gopis to see Krishna. Finally they went out of the house and they went down to the Jamuna, and then they saw Krishna on Kaliya. When Krishna subdued Kaliya, Radha and other gopis had not yet seen remarkable Krishna in person. They were not prevented and went to see the pastime just like other inhabitants of Vraja. In order that the gopis see him, he purposely delayed in subduing Kaliya. So we see in the description of Bhagavatam that Krishna was in the coils of Kaliya, and then they all thought, he's dead or whatever like that. And he wasn't moving or anything, and then finally he got out, and then he began dancing on the heads of Kaliya. So he delayed this whole struggle with Kaliya. And one of the reasons is that he wanted the gopis to see him at that time. When the young girls came there from their houses, they did not experience grief as the others did, but simply experienced extreme love for Krishna. Everyone was lamenting because they saw Krishna in the coils of Kaliya, but the gopis, on the other hand, they were very joyful because they could see Krishna. When Krishna emerged from the lake, Radha and other gopis saw him for the first time. They lost consciousness, but saw him internally. They remained in a state of fainting and recovering for days and nights that followed. So their love was so intense that they would faint because of that. When Krishna decided to meet with his friends, he heard through others that the gopis had fainted. Feeling pain, he played a sweet melody on his flute, and they quickly recovered. So here we see the power of Krishna's flute, that even though Krishna's not present, if they hear the flute, it's like Krishna's, non-different from Krishna, so they get satisfied by that. When Krishna finished his 6th year and the gopis were somewhat less in age, bliss appeared in Krishna and the imperishable youthful Lakshmis because of the suffusion of love. So actually they hadn't even got to Kaishora period. That happened when Krishna was 8 years old, but here he's just 6 and then going to the 7th year. So the love is becoming quite intense at this point. The gopis showed symptoms of Navakishore during the Pauganda period. Their glances were dark, their lips were deep red, their cheeks were spotless, their chests showed breasts. If their exteriors showed their inner natures, what they must have been hiding within. So they're externally, internally, they began to express their love for Krishna. When among them Radha radiated brilliance in the first year of Kaishore, the fame of all other women disappeared. So we saw that even as a child she was beautiful, and as she grew she became more and more beautiful. So when she reached Kaishore age, then she reached the peak of beauty. She was like a flowering desire tree among various flowering creepers. The moon has weakened, the young Kanjana bird glances lamely. The sesame flower blossoms withered. The bimba fruit has become devoid of its red color. The creepers whose golden color defeats gold have dried. Their beauty has been defeated by the beauty of Radha. Often Radha's eyes are compared to Kanjana birds because the Kanjana bird flirts around like this, so Radha's eyes are darting here and there. And her nose is compared to a sesame flower. And her lips are compared to the bimba fruit, which is very red. But none of these actually have any significance in comparison to Radha. without even seeing him, on hearing about him, the actors of insane. No one could understand their actions. Among them, Radha stared blankly, shed tears constantly, and shivered. She perspired, her hair stood on end, and she became stunned. She became fatigued and did not reply when addressed. Seeing her, friends lamented constantly. So she's got all sorts of sattvika bhavas, and this is before the Rasa Leela, when they actually got to speak to Krishna. So even before then, she had all these very intense symptoms. And so that all they could do is they could look at him when he came back to the village after herding the cows. When he entered the town, he showed his lotus face, surrounded by locks of hair resembling swarms of bees, eager for a lotus, covered with dust raised by the cows' hooves. It seemed as if the gopis' black eyes were bound to that face by the noose of Cupid. Seeing Krishna in the early morning with difficulty, the gopis passed the summer months. Then the monsoon season arrived with rumbling clouds. Attracted to Krishna, the women suffered from the summer season. Thinking they would get relief in the monsoon season, they welcomed it, but the opposite happened and they simply suffered. So again, this is 1 year previous when, to the actual meeting. The women within whom Krishna appeared like a cloud produced a second monsoon by their tears, so that the rain-loving frogs began to criticize the real monsoon. So they had profuse tears that were more than the monsoon rains. When the monsoon, creating so many obstacles, was over, the autumn season arrived. They thought that the autumn would bring a cloudless sky. But when the autumn arrived, it brought double confusion in their emotions. Finding no alternative, Krishna, though fearing the glances of eyes, like being beaten with a stick, when the gopis did not accept to be controlled, began playing his flute to control them. As bees enjoy the creepers for a short time and wandering about land on the lotus and remain there, the eyes of Krishna gazed at the gopis 2 or 3 at a time, and finally, wandering about in a remarkable way, landed upon Radha. So this way Radha becomes the principal gopi. When his glance remained there without moving, he thought, Radha is the beauty among all types of beauty, the supreme Lakshmi among all Lakshmis, the power of seeing for my eyes, for not seeing her, my eyes are blind. When this happened, Radha's gaze became fixed on him, and she began trembling, being controlled by the spread of awakening rasa. Agitated, she appeared most beautiful, endowed with the greed incited by him. Whose eyes can be compared to Radha's eyes, which became filled with tears on seeing his moon face? Can the lotus blossoming in autumn and exuding streams of nectar equal her eye? So in this way, the love began to increase and increase and increase until finally, of course, there was the Rasa Leela, and that's when they actually met. Just to explain about the gopis, there are hundreds and hundreds of groups, which are called yutas. And each there's hundreds and thousands in each group, which makes each group very big. It's huge groups, and they all have a leader, and that leader has a certain distinct mood which is different from all the others. So some are considered very mild, some are medium, some are very bold, some argue a lot, some are very compliant, etc. So they all have different moods. In these groups, the chief gopis endowed with the most excellent qualities are Radha, Chandravali, Bhadra, Shamala, Palika, and others. They're considered higher because their love is more intense. Just as we saw among the Sakis, or maybe the Nitya Sakis and the Prana Sakis and the Priya Sakis and the Parama Prashta Sakis. As you go up there, their love is more intense. So the gopis have different degrees of intensity of their love. And at the top we have these. They each have 10 million gopis in their group. Of these two, Radhika is famous as the highest because of possessing all sweetness. In the Shruti, she's called Gandharva. That's mentioned in the Gopal Tapani Upanishad. She's called Gandharva. So Radha and Chandravali are at the top, but Radha is superior. They have actually different personalities. Radha is bold, and Chandravali is very compliant. And that's reflected in Dwarka, where we see Rukmini is very compliant, and Satyabhama is very bold. Satyabhama demands things from Krishna, and Rukmini is very timid in front of Krishna. So that's like Chandravali and Radha. And so of the two, then the highest, the extreme attachment to Krishna is in Radha. Oops. The son of none is endowed with unequaled sweetness. He is dearer to Radha than 100 trillion of her lives multiplied by the same amount. So Radha takes Krishna as the treasure of her life. She is skillful at various arts. She is the very form of an ocean of nectar. Her complexion is like fresh Gorochan, liquid gold, or stationary lightning. Her form is most dazzling. Gorochan is a type of, it comes from the bile, solidified bile of the cow, which is bright yellow. It's considered very auspicious. Or liquid gold or stationary lighting. So that's her complexion, very bright gold. She is beautiful with colorful blue cloth. She ornaments her limbs with various pearl decorations and various flowers. She has long hair made beautiful with strings of pearls. Her braid shines brightly with well-placed flower garlands. Her beautiful forehead shines intensely and is decorated with sindoor. That's this here, the red line up here. Her wonderful locks of hair decorate her forehead and are made beautiful with colorful petals. Her graceful arms, which bewilder the beauty of Cupid's arms, are decorated with blue bracelets. Radha's lotus eyes spread to her ears. They shine with collyrium and conquer the three worlds. Her nose is like a sesame flower, decorated with a pearl ornament. Anointed with a variety of perfumes, her nose shines brightly. She has 2 jeweled ear ornaments made of various colors. Her lips are as charming as nectar, surpassing red lotuses. Her rows of teeth are like lines of pearls and are decorated with her tongue. Her beautiful lotus mouth shines like 10 million moons. It is red like a bimba fruit and endowed with a loving smile, charming as nectar. The beauty of her chin bewilders Cupid. The dot of lamp black on her chin is like a bee resting on a golden lotus. Her neck is beautiful with lines and decorated with a pearl necklace. The back of her neck is charming and her sides are enchanting. Her arms bewilder beauty itself. She has jeweled armbands. She has jeweled bracelets shining with clusters of gems. Her hands are like red lotuses with nails shining like moons. Her hands are marked with auspicious signs of a bee, a lotus, crescent moon, earring, umbrella, post, or pillar, conch, tree, flower, chamara, and swastika, and are decorated with various patterns. Her fingers shine and are ornamented with jeweled rings. Her beautiful lotus feet are ornamented with jeweled anklets and twisted bands. She has rings on her toes. The auspicious marks on her feet include the conch, the moon, elephant, barley corn, goad, chariot, flag, drum, swastika, and fish. Apparently she has 19 total on her marks on her feet. Now, Krishna also has 19 marks on his feet. Radha shines with 16 accoutrements. Freshly bathed body, a pearl shining at the tip of her nose, a colored cloth, a sash around her waist, tied up braid, ear ornaments, anointed limbs, flowers in her hair, garland around her neck, lotus in her hand, betel nut in her mouth, musk dot on her chin, mascara on her eyes, patterns on her cheeks, lac on her feet, and tilak on her forehead. So we see all the parts of her body have different ornaments on them. Radha shines like the sun with 12 ornaments. Her shining crown jewel, her 2 gold earrings, her gold belt, her medallion, her 2 chakri salakas, these are ear ornaments, her 2 bracelets, her throat ornament, her rings, her necklace, her armbands glowing like a constellation, her anklets made of jewels, and her dazzling toe rings. So, this is a short description of Radharani. So we just end with a little prayer. This is actually from an Astaka of Raghunath Das Goswami. When will Sri Radhika, who is a splendid ruby in the crown of all nectarian doe-eyed girls, a swan swimming in the lake of love for jubilant Lord Krishna, and a celestial vine sprouting from Vraja's exalted King Vrishabhanu, bathe me in her service. So we should this day pray for the mercy of Radharani so we can engage in her service, and that way get the mercy of all the other Sakhis and inhabitants of Vrindavan. Hare Krishna. Okay.
Well, actually, their love is a constant. Then, if you say that there is some gopis that have more love, then where's the balance of that? Those who have less, obviously, where's that balance of love directed to? You know the example of the glass of milk. If you put that much milk and put a drop of ink, you don't know where the glass is full.
Mm-hmm.
You say that if the gopis love Krishna,
and some have more love than others.
Some less,
yeah.
So then the balance, where is that directed to?
If they have less love?
Yeah.
Well, actually, that's their capacity. That's their nature. Just like in the material world, some people have more capacity for love than others, or affection, showing affection than others. Some are a little bit more cool in their approach to everybody. Some are more passionate in their approach. So, like that in the spiritual world, some are very content showing like this. As some are in Madhurya Rasa, some are in Sakya, and some are in Vatsalya. So these are all degrees of intensity. Shanta is the weakest. Dasya is a little more. Sakya is more intense, Vatsalya is more intense, and then Madhurya is more intense. So we can say, well, why doesn't everybody have Madhurya Rasa?
But within Madhurya, there are differences.
Yeah.
Some gopis, they're all in Madhurya.
Yeah, they're all Madhurya, but then again, there's intensities there. Just as there's intensities among the other persons. So within Sakya Rasa, there's various intensities. Within Madhurya Rasa, various intensities also, according to the individual person. That's all. So, everybody's an individual. So, but they're content with whatever type of love they're expressing.
So it's the capacity of the soul.
Yeah. And they're satisfied, and that gives them their bliss, and they're satisfied with that. Just as the Sakas have a certain intensity, they're satisfied with that. They don't aspire to go into Madhurya Rasa. And
in the beginning of the Bhakti Rasa Rita Sindhu, when Rupa Swami is doing his Mangalashan, he glorifies Shama and Palika.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Palika's in Chandravali's group.
Is she there also?
Yeah, Palika's.
But then we see that like the 8 principal Sakhis that we're given a Tunga Vidya and Shamakalapa and Sujay Rangadevi and like etc. Yeah. So why does he mention those two, not the other? Especially the leader and the Shaka, because they're too much prominent.
Yeah. Well, he mentioned, it's like this, he's mentioning all the groups in one sense, in relation to Radha. So Radha is the dearest, and then around her we have her immediate group with Lalita and Vishaka, her Swapaksha, so to speak. And then we have the next group, which is the friendly group, I think it's Shamala or something like that. Friendly group, they support Radha's group. And whenever there's a conflict with Chandravali, they will support Radha and her group. Then we have the neutral group, which is actually favorable to Chandravali. And then we have Chandravali herself with Padma, Shaibya, Palika, etc. So we get all of them mentioned. We get one person from Chandravali's group, one from the neutral group, one from the friendly group, and then one from Radha's group, and then Radha herself. So we get all the types of group in relation to Radha there.
So in essence, in the Mangal Khan is glorifying all the gopis.
Yeah. And of course, ultimately, Radha is the highest one there. Yeah. And that's only to illustrate that Krishna is Akila Rasamrita Murti. He is the form of all rasas, which include 7 secondary and 5 primary. But then, I think Jiva Goswami points out that because Madhurya Rasa is the highest, he just selects that one, but actually he could illustrate all the rasas, but he just illustrates that one because it's the highest, and then among that, then he gives the variations from the Chandravali up to Radha.
So in essence, that goes back to Ajita's question. He's not just glorifying Radha as the highest, he's glorifying all those different relationships, all those different levels of relationships.
Yeah. It's just like in the Brihad Bhagavatamrita there, Narada Muni goes to the different, to see who's got the most love for mercy of Krishna and the love for Krishna, and then you go higher and higher and higher, and then they get the spiritual world, and then you get to the gopis finally. But then it's said there that actually they're all perfect. All these persons, whether they're in Swargaloka and they got their way of worshipping Krishna or Vishnu, or it's Ramchandra and Hanuman or whatever, they're all perfect and we can't criticize anybody, and they're all satisfied with that love. But they're just different because there's variety among different jivas.
Well, you said that they're 6 years old. They separated from Krishna, but they have an eternal relationship with Krishna.
What's that?
In the 6th year.
When they're 6. Yeah.
When the Shaktis are born.
Yeah.
And you said the parents keep them
separate. Yeah.
So they have an eternal relationship with Krishna.
Yeah.
So what happens in the 6 years?
They're growing up, and they get married. They get married to their husbands, so-called husbands.
But they're not with Krishna.
No, they haven't even seen him.
But what happens to their eternal relationship with Krishna? They're thinking about it.
Well, simultaneously in the spiritual world already. It's not that they leave the spiritual world. They're there also simultaneously, and in another universe also, at different ages also, because the same leelas are happening in different universes in different times. But this is just like we could say within this particular earthly pastime. This is the progress that happens here, but it's happening in other universes simultaneously almost, or staggered. We have, your thing is next.
Thank you so much, Maharaj.
Hare Krishna.
And like Maharaj, 2 wonderful classes today, this morning, and that maybe I think we should show our appreciation.